business leaders, business owners, we have executive assistants that we absolutely rely on to get things done.
How can strategic depth give you better foundation to scale larger? What are the 5 to 10 things that scare us that if they go wrong are going to really cost us the most?
Add strategic depth through people, but we can also systematize the process.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Well, welcome to The Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel. In this week's episode, I'm joined by my co-host, Rich Wood, Maui Mastermind Business Coaching Director, and just a good friend. And he and I, who have, between us, coached, several thousand businesses over the last 25 years. We're going to talk about strategic depth, but we're going to do that through a new framework that you might not have thought about. We're going to give you the specific context that if you're new to building out the strategic depth of systems, cross-trained team, and the culture that does that inside your business, we're going to give you the 4 steps for how to do that. If strategic depth is something you've been doing in your company, we're going to help you take it from a defensive strategy and turn it into one of your greatest growth and scaling opportunities. And we'll talk about how to do that too as well for you. So enjoy this episode of The Business Coach. Well, welcome to The Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel, and today I'm joined by Rich Wood, Maui Mastermind's Coaching Director. Rich, as many of you know, has a rich background, no pun intended, as a business leader, a business thinker, as a business owner. He's built and scaled successful enterprises. He's exited from enterprises that way. He's been a coach now for many years. He's our most senior person inside the coaching team. And today, Rich, we're going to be talking about strategic depth. Before we jump into strategic depth, though, I want you to think about, in your background working with a client, a case where you had a client who lost this key person and it caused all kinds of consternation and issues with that part. A time in your business, whether it's a client or in one of your own companies, where a horror story where you had so much reliance on this one person and all of a sudden you lost them and you thought, oh my gosh. And I'll give a quick story here first. As we think about strategic depth, our goal is to defend you, the audience. How do you protect yourself from the loss of a key person? And then at the second part of this episode, we're going to go into how can strategic depth give you better foundation to scale larger. But my quick story is this. I remember I was planning to take my first summer off, Rich, ever in the business. I've done that for years now, where I'll take the 3-month period of the summer while my kids are out of school off. And Maui's companies, they do really, really well now. But the first time it happened, and I was going to take off from June through August, end of August. And in April, the very end of April, one of our executive team members gave her notice. And then literally 2 weeks later, another one of our key team members on the executive team gave his notice in the middle of May. And I'm thinking, crap, what horrible timing. How am I going to take time off? I've made all these commitments to my family. I've made these commitments to my mastermind group that I'm going to take the summer off. How am I going to do this? And it really was a moment where the rubber met the road in terms of strategic depth. I'm curious, Rich, what's the story for you, either in a business that you owned or a business that you coached, where the strategic depth weaknesses were revealed in a painful flash of fire?
Well, I can share with you many examples of client businesses where a lack of strategic depth has created risk to the business. But I'll share a personal story that I think translates to something a lot of us can relate to, and that is having an executive assistant. So if you have an executive assistant, many of us as business leaders, business owners, we have executive assistants that we absolutely rely on to get things done, that we become dependent on to get things done. And if we don't have strategic depth built into our team, as an executive assistant, having an auxiliary person that is backed up with that executive assistant's capabilities and so on, then we're basically stuck without, in a river without a boat without a paddle. So we're stuck. So we can add strategic depth through people, but we can also systematize the process that we're executing with the people that helps the replacements be far more effective and efficient. So have strategic depth in people, have strategic depth in systems as well. So I think it applies in both ways.
For sure. So let's define strategic depth. So strategic depth is the idea of having the formalized business processes and procedures, the systems for how to do a function with a cross-trained team or team member who can do the function, such that if you were to lose Madeline, or you were to lose Carl or Jody or Susan, that somebody else could still step in using your systems to fulfill the important processes that needed to get done.
Right.
And strategic depth goes more than that, says it's having the culture inside of our business, that in our business, building out the systems and cross-training team members to have backups is really important. And that's critical with that part. So how do we go about doing this? Let's first of all give them a simple process. And then, Rich, I want you to flesh out what I'm about to share. So the simple process looks like this. If I'm working with a client and she's got a company, let's say, for example, it's a medical practice. And I'm thinking of one of our clients who runs a medical practice with an urgent care, et cetera. And she does a very good volume, very profitable business. In her company, when she first came to us, there were things in the business that only one person could do, her office manager. And so now she's got a reliance on that office manager. The good news is, years ago, it would all be on her shoulders. She was the only one who knew how to do payroll. She was the only one who knew how to do ordering of certain types of supplies. She moved that reliance from her shoulders to her key office manager, but it stopped there. And what happens if she lost that key office manager? So now we start working with her. We say, okay, what's step number one? Let's brainstorm. What are our biggest vulnerabilities from a strategic depth perspective? What are the 5 to 10 things that scare us, that if they go wrong are going to really cost us the most? The fact that no one else knows how to do payroll would be an example. You will really upset your staff if they don't get paid. So that would be an example, step one I would list there. Number 2 says, let's prioritize our list. I can't fix 8 things at once. Of this list of 8 things, what's the one area of vulnerability strategic depth-wise this quarter that I can make positive steps to improve? So step 1, my big list. Step 2, I prioritize so I can choose the 1 or 2 things that I'll do this quarter. Step 3 says I do it. Step 4 says repeat the process every 90 days. And if I do that, like we've seen for our clients, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, you're better. Not fixed, but you're better. 24 months, 36 months later, we're really better. Within 48 months, we're a different company altogether. And then we can start using strategic depth, not for defense, but for offense, which we'll get to. Rich, what comments would you want to make to flesh out about this defensive use of strategic depth?
So I think the process you laid out, understand what the risks are to the business, which translates to vulnerabilities of the business, identify the impact of those risks or vulnerabilities, and prioritize those on those which have the biggest impact to the success of the business, the biggest impact to the profitability of the business, the biggest impact to executing on the business objectives, and so on. So prioritize them from biggest impact to lowest impact. And then I think it's important to prioritize those and then develop a plan to fill in those vulnerabilities or to backfill the vulnerabilities through the development of a systematized approach on the business side that starts with the processes, the procedures, fold those into a UBS, a business system, so that you can create strategic depth, not just through the people, but through the execution of the things that they do to implement and to complete their jobs.
Yeah, I mean, early on, I think what you're going to find is that you've, as an employee, when we've never talked about systems before or strategic depth before, the first time we bring it up, our staff gets a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit scared. I know I've had to deal with this with client businesses.
Right.
You know, why are you talking about wanting to systematize what I do, et cetera? So the best practice says that we bring this up before we ever hire somebody. So if I'm interviewing Ann for a key role managing the accounting function in my business, I make sure that in the interview process, I talk about, well, Ann, here at Acme Services, Inc., we really believe in systematization and we believe in having strategic depth. Give me 2 examples in your last job where you had to process out, where you had to document and systematize, the monthly write-up work that you did in the accounting function. If I make it part of the interview process, later on, it's not scary. It's an accepted part. It's like saying that if we choose you to work here, Ann, this is what you've already agreed to. So that's the best way. But then I always have clients who say, well, David, thank you for telling me that now. Where were you 17 years ago when I started the company? And to which I said, well, I'm sorry, I failed you, right? But at least we're here now. So here's what we do now. And so if you have to deal with it now, we go back to people and we bring it up from their frame. Hey, I realize that as a company, we've been lax about how can we systematize what we do? How can we cross-train people to what we do?
Exactly.
There are things in the business that only I can do right now. And what happens if I got hurt? I got sick and was out of the business. You've seen that happen. What it really gave me was an eye-opener that I'm going to make the commitment to you in this company, and that I'm going to work hard to start to document the things that currently only I can do. Some of them I'm going to cross-train you how to do. Some of them I'm going to cross-train Daniel how he can do them, so that every quarter we'll pick 1 or 2 things that I only know how to do, and we're going to document and we're going to cross-train that quarter with other people. And as we do that, I'm going to, first of all, ask you, can you see why that's important? Ann says yes. I then say, Ann, I'm going to want you to do the same thing. Each quarter, I'm going to want you to pick 1 or 2 things that currently only you know how to do, and I'm going to want you to document or process it out into a system, and I'm going to want you to cross-train somebody else as your backup. Number 1, heaven forbid something happened where you got hurt, the rest of us can still continue on so that when you come back, the company is in good spot. And number 2, that way you can actually have a vacation without wondering what's the mess you're going to come back to for all the things that never happened while you were away. And you and I laugh about this because both of us have come back from a 1.5, 2 week trip to it almost was like not worth going away, all the stuff that had piled up while we're gone. And we're going to improve that. Are you with me? Are you game with that, Ann? And that's the languaging. That's the framing with a team member. Best from point of hire. Second best, I make it where I acknowledge the weaknesses on myself and I say this is what I'm going to do, so that it lowers the perceived risk or fear with why I'm asking them to do that. Comments from you, Rich, as I shared that.
Yeah, so 2 comments that I would make is that there's 2 steps where you need to start to inculcate this process, the cross-training process. Number 1, you started at the hiring side of the equation, making sure that the people that you hire know what you're doing and know what the objectives are. And number 2, if you're starting it from a team that exists currently within your organizational structure, make sure you're sensitive to the concept that people are sensitive about cross-training, because that crosses over into their comfort zone on job security. A lot of people think that if I'm training Joe to do my job, then Joe can replace me at any time and I become vulnerable. My job becomes vulnerable. So I think it's important to make sure that you openly communicate to your team as you move down this process of creating strategic depth in your organization at all levels.
I like that. And I always say I want to make it the weather. You and I know that in a business, we have to fight against FUD factor, F-U-D, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And anything we do that reduces or diminishes FUD factor, fear, uncertainty, doubt, it makes my business better. Anything I do that increases fear, uncertainty, or doubt causes more problems down the road in many different ways, dramas and interpersonal stuff and other types of issues. So if I can make strategic depth the weather, no one gets upset for more than a moment that we might not like that it's raining today. We might not like that it's 94 degrees outside. But we also know that we can't go outside and yell at the sky and have it change, right? We don't control that. We accept it. Right. So we want to make strategic depth the weather in a business. That's just the way at our company we do things. We can do that best if we get them before they're hired and say that this is part of the weather system inside of our company. It just is. And if that's not a fit for you, then you're not a fit for us. And we do that by asking them for occasions and instances in their actual history where they have made those types of hires and systems, and they've done the cross training. I've given language for the other side, but I want to come back to this idea, Rich, here, that we also can frame it that strategic depth is a protection, not just for the company, but it is a protection for them. That's why I always start off with myself, because the biggest vulnerability for most of our client, for their team members, is not that Ann trains Daniel how to do her job and therefore we replace Ann. That's almost never the case. The biggest risk is I get hit by a car, and then the business is not yet ready to stand on its own 2 feet, and everyone loses their job, and all of our customers get screwed. So strategic depth doesn't just protect the business, it protects every single employee and their families of the business. It protects every one of your customers. It protects all your suppliers and everybody else who has a direct or indirect stake in the business. And that's part of what we have to explain. And if we do it in the context of us as the owner, about why we're trying to want to cross-train and process through in a manageable way, 1 or 2 things each quarter, and we're letting that team member know that, hey, I might want to cross-train you on how to back me up on that, it opens up the reciprocity that they get that they're going to need to do the same thing.
Right.
Yeah. Let's shift over to strategic depth, not as defense. These things help protect the business. Now let's talk about somewhere at about the 24-month mark of doing this work quarter by quarter. You've got 7, 8, 9 quarters under your belt of doing this. Strategic depth now is not something that gives you protection. It's something that gives you opportunity, because now you have the ability to scale. That strategic depth, these elements that protect the company from the loss of a key person, now give it scalability to make something that used to be only Ann could do. Now Ann and Daniel could do that, so we've expanded capacity. Plus, when Ann froze it in a system, now we can improve the system so we get 20%, 50%, 100% more capacity from Ann's effort in an area, because we can formally go back and re-engineer the process. Comments from you about strategic depth as offense?
Yeah, so as offense, so one comment I want to go back and just make a point to your previous on the hiring side of the equation. I think it's important to generate or create strategic depth that's driven by leadership, but I think it has to be inculcated within the culture of a company, so that if it's in the culture of the company, then people feel less anxious about its implementation. On the strategic side of the equation, it follows in line with being able to extend your leverage of your time through other people. So it helps with scaling the business, because now you can do more with a fewer number of people to get the business growth in a much faster direction. So to me, strategic depth lends itself to extending one's talent and experiences and capabilities through other people that helps you scale the business. So to me, it's a scaling function.
I love it. This idea of, quote, extending somebody's talents and capabilities through other people. I just captured that. That was really important as a way to get more with less with that.
Right.
So look, what are the key coaching takeaways for our audience here? Number one, if strategic depth is new to you and your company, the place to start is simple, right? We gave you 4 simple steps. We're going to list out the 5 to 10 biggest vulnerabilities that we can think about that the lack of strategic depth could hurt us. Number 2, we're going to prioritize that list and pick one thing this quarter that we're going to make more depth than we currently have. Number 3, we're going to do that this quarter. And at the end of the quarter, number 4 is we're going to repeat that process so that every quarter for the next 4 quarters, we improve strategic depth. Something happens magically, though. We start with just the owner, but somewhere around about the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th time of doing this, now we bring in a couple other key individuals that repeat the process so that they're picking one thing each quarter to do the same thing with. So that's the first step. For those of you that have strategic depth to some degree, now you're going to come back to your prioritizing a list and ask the question differently. Hey, David, we've been working with you, or we've been listening to the podcast for a while now. We've got a good handle on it. We still have some places we need to improve. For you, the next leap for you, the coaching for you is, how can you make strategic depth part of the culture, as you heard Rich, I heard you share, part of the culture of the company? And part of that is describing why it matters. Part of that is you modeling and giving attention to people who are doing it, which is an informal reward for putting their attention on it. And part of it is getting your other leaders to replicate what you did with them with their individual teams, so that your person running marketing, your person running production or operations, she's doing that with her team, such that now it's become part of the culture, the fabric of the business. Any last comments from you, Rich, that I'm going to bring us to a close here?
Yeah, so one last comment. So I would want everybody to keep this in the back of their mind. The concept of strategic depth compounds the results over time with the business. So just remember that everything we do in the business, repeated processes embedded within the culture, creates compounded growth of the business.
I love this idea. And you're so right. With that, we're going to end today's episode. The idea that how do we keep the compounding clock working? That's something you've heard us talk repeatedly about on the Business Coach. That if we can keep that 12%, that 18%, that 20% growth rate of our company, that compounded annual growth rate, that CAGR going, and we can do it not just for 2 years, but for 5 years, not just for 5 years, but for 10 years, not just for 10 years, but for 15 or 20 years, that relentless compounding curve, anything we do to keep that clock going is going to make us more successful in the business, and it's going to help us serve more, profit more, and touch more lives. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Business Coach. And Rich, I guess we'll see him next time, right?
I had fun. Thanks again, David.
Bye, everybody.